Hello and welcome to the special edition of Spectator TV. I'm James Heale and I'm joined today by Katy, Spectator's political editor, and John McTernan, former aide to Tony Blair. Now, we're filming on the second day of Labour conference here in Liverpool. Katy, to what extent could you say that the ghost of Sue Gray is hanging over conference on day two?
Well, Sue Gray is not here, despite, I think, obviously being in the newspapers a lot in recent weeks. Sue Gray being Keir Starmer's chief of staff. And I think you can say the build-up to Labour conference has not been ideal for Keir Starmer. I think on paper this should be a really celebratory affair. It's the party's first time back in government, first conference back in government for over 14 years. And yet it feels as though various self-forced errors, so the big row over freebies, but then also this repeated sense of internal briefings, hostile briefings or stories about Sue Gray. Most recently, one saying that she earns £3,000 more than the Prime Minister, are just adding to a sense that, are they squandering the honeymoon, which is probably by now over? And I think, the official reason Sue Gray is not here is that she is working at a very important summit. Of course, she did attend last year. And I think that, probably Labour MPs and ministers are tiring a bit of, on podcasts such as this, but also in their TV interviews, being asked about internal wranglings of number 10, as opposed to what they want this to be, which is the change begins narrative.
John, what do you think these sort of stories coming into conference have allowed to continue to dominate over the last couple of days? Because on the one hand, it is a chance for Labour family to get together and celebrate a massive landslide achievement after 15 years in the wilderness. But on the other, there are these kind of niggling rows that still dominate and are obsessing a lot of people in number 10. Yeah,
look, I wish Sue Gray was here because the Labour Party is a big family, and one thing that we do when one of our own is being picked on by the press, we actually show some solidarity. So I think actually it would have been good for her to be here and to feel that from party members, party activists, because she was part of the victory, and the victory was an important one. I think the weather we're having, this pouring rain, is dampening everybody's spirits in a way, and it kind of, in a way, it reflects the run into the conference, which was, as you've been saying, you and Katy have been saying, difficult stories for the party. And look, I will relentlessly repeat my remedy for this, which is when you're the government, what you say goes, and what you say is news. Labour could have had news all last week, news of its own, every single day, or whether it's on planning or whether it's on various elements of what are going to be announced during this week have been trailed a bit during this week, what's going to be in Keir's speech. You can pre-brief things, and you just see today, Rachel's able to announce things. She's the Chancellor, not the Shadow Chancellor, so what she says will be a pilot. These things will happen. And I think government's a bully pulpit. And I've sometimes wonder whether Labour's got a self-censoring opposition-style mindset, which is, can we actually announce it? Can we drive the news by just saying things? We actually can, and we probably should be doing a bit of that.
And John there mentions Rachel's speech, obviously dominating the second day of conference. Talk us through it, Katy. That lasted about half an hour. There was one heckle incident, but it seemed to get a very warm reaction from the conference hall.
Yeah, there was a protester protesting the fact there are still arms sales to Israel. Of course, they have been limited to a degree, protesting that the Labour Party had not gone further. I think these days Labour politicians almost welcome the protesters because Rachel Reeves uses the same line that Keir Starmer has used and others, which is saying, this is a changed Labour Party. We are not the party of protest. Huge cheers. They get escorted out. They can say, oh, we're professionalising it. We don't tolerate that anymore. Look at the grip on our party. So it's probably the easiest bit of her speech. The harder thing is the triangulation she's having to do between warning of difficult decisions ahead, the so-called fiscal black hole that the Treasury has not released documents on yet in terms of official figures, and then combining that message with also trying to suggest to business that UK is a great place to invest. And yes, we might keep saying everything is absolutely awful, but it's not that awful. You should definitely move all your money here on your bases. And then at the same time, trying to say to the party, please go along with this, stay on our path, and to point to a wider mission. I think that's what she tried to do today, which was, again, it does go back to the weather slightly. I think Labour's misery vibe, which has been, the past couple of weeks. I think when you're walking around, constantly in the rain and everyone can't really get to places, it just is compounding it a bit. But I think, she's trying to set out the fact that, difficult decisions now have a purpose later down the line. So, she's never been more optimistic about the future of Britain. But in order to get to the place where they can start to do the things they really want to do, they're going to have to be some ways to tackle the so-called black hole. And I think that it was, within the hall, she had a very long-standing ovation at the end of the speech. There are lots of cheers throughout, supportive shouts, only the one troublesome heckler. But the hall is obviously where, there's going to be a big effort. Despite us saying it's not as celebratory as it could be, people are still very happy to be back in government and back in power. And I think her critics, are probably those outside the hall. You've got some to the left, and then you also obviously have voters. If you look at how Labour's doing at the moment, seems to be losing some support. But then I think a lot of that speech was also about trying to speak to business and to have that narrative of actually, we are, very stable, we're a good place to invest. Because I think the thing that's actually worrying the Treasury more than, losing some points in polling over 4 years before a general election is a concern that perhaps investor and business confidence is being dented, is something Andy Haldane, the former Bank of England economist, has spoken about. Which is, are you talking the UK down in a way that starts to have a detrimental effect both on business perception and consumer confidence?
Yeah, John, I mean, party conference speeches are always a sort of balancing act, aren't they, between sort of appealing to the party faithful in the hall and, of course, landing your message on television and to business outside. How far did Rachel go in managing to balance both things successfully?
Look, I thought she showed real confidence. I think every time you see Rachel at a big set-piece event, she gets better and better, and that's an important role for her as the Chancellor. And I think she got a real warmth, genuine warmth from the hall. And that was a kind of celebration of being in power. And it was also solidarity backing in behind her. I think the question of business is a really critical one. I've been speaking to businesses during conference, and the word that comes back again and again from them is certainty. They want to know what the framework is going to be. That's why there's this big investment conference coming up. That's why Johnny Reynolds has been talking about an industrial strategy. And you can start to see some of the joins coming together between what Johnny was saying and what I've been saying and what Rachel was saying. And I think it did start to lay the groundwork. There was definitely it was an optimistic performance with lots of smiles. I think that's really important. I think talking down the economy is a danger I think it affects the vibes of the voters. They kind of go, it's a bit depressing just to hear about bad things. So it was good to hear a bit of the uplift from her. I think a bit disappointed we didn't have an emergency budget in July, actually just do all that stuff, which would have put context on lots of decisions, and we'd now be seeing things happening about that. I think the stretched out timetable that we get elected in July the 4th, we don't really know the framework for business and for the country until the end of October. It's feeling to drag a little bit. So I think being tied to a timetable dictated effectively by the OBR seems a bit funny. It goes to the core of what the party's leadership got to answer this question, which is change begins, yeah? What change? And when will I see it? And you tell me it begins, but I want to see it begin.
And of course, fleshing out that challenge, what does the change look like? Will tomorrow be Keir Starmer when he'll be making his first speech as Prime Minister Labour Conference? Katy, what can we expect to see in it? And John, if you were still advising the Prime Minister, what would you say this is what you need to get across in your speech tomorrow?
So I think for Keir Starmer, it's actually a great opportunity to, again, the past few weeks haven't been great for him. When he gave an interview, say, I do have a grip on my government. Yeah. You don't expect that under 100 days in, having to, as soon as
have to say it,
having to repeat the charge. Also, might try and, not even do that. Say, I am focused instead. But I think this is a chance for Keir Starmer to almost put the past kind of difficult weeks or try to behind him. And as John says, give, people something to think about, give journalists something to write about. I've had some say, speaking to Labour politicians at this conference, if you're saying the problem is journalists, they write about trivial things, they're not interested, they're more interested in personality, politics and policy and so forth. And it's like, well, I'm sure some people will agree with that, but you still have to deal with them. They're still going to write these things. And I think that tomorrow, if Keir Starmer can, I suppose, point to a wider vision, make some announcements, look as though he, does have a plan and a way of achieving it, that's going to mean that a conference that started on a pretty low note, the Saturday headlines going into conference are not change begins, but Prime Minister will now buy his own clothes. That's not really what you want. I think Keir Starmer's more to be asked, who are you wearing these days in terms of which donor? So put that behind, and if you can end on a more positive note, then I think it will, in the grand scheme of things, been quite a successful conference for him.
Yeah, and look, I think some concrete details, like let's have something about housing. What is the next step on planning? And what is the next step on house building? Are we going to get more council houses, which I think we desperately need, more social housing? And actually that sense that it's a social democratic vision of the future. Anybody can liberate planning. It's hard to do, but party can do it. But you do it for a purpose. And if the purpose is to build out more affordable homes, more social homes, so that people actually have a better standard of living, it's telling the story that leads us towards 2029, which is, I reckon, do you feel better off today than you did 4 or 5 years ago is going to be the test that Labour are aiming for. Let's start to hear more of that and the upbeatness as well.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Katy. And thank you for watching Spectator TV.